Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Daily on the Grueling Truth Sports Network, brought to you by the Sheridan Report. Go check out the Sheridan Report for all your gambling needs. And he was right again tonight, too, because he came on Survive in Advance and guaranteed us that Rutgers would beat Northwestern. So if you bet any money and followed Bobby Sheridan, you definitely won. I'm your co-host for Inside Boxing Daily, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I want to welcome in my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm always doing well whenever I get to talk boxing with you, Mike, so let's get it going.
I thought you were just going to say you're always doing well when you get to talk to me. But all right, we'll go with it. Close enough. Let's start off with boxing news. A fight between WBA interim light heavyweight champion Marcus Browne and former WBO 175-pound champion John Pascal is being planned for the spring. Now, how does Jean Pascal keep coming up with these fights, Jeremiah?
Oh, well, I don't know. Probably just because he's a known quantity, my guess is. He's a known quantity.
And he's safe.
And he's on the downside. You know what I mean? I mean, he just seems like he's a gatekeeper at this time. I mean, and to be honest with you, I kind of think he's worthy of that. I mean, if you're not going to be taking the tough fights, like a lot of these guys aren't. I mean, it seems like, they take one soft touch, and then they take a harder fight sometime in the year, right? They split between the two. So for me, if Browne does not have, what I'd really like to see is for him to rematch Kalajic or however you say his name, Hot Rod is his nickname. I would love to see that rematch because that was a damn close fight, and a lot of people thought that Hot Rod won it. He was hurt in that fight. It presents a challenge. I'm not sure what Hot Rod is up to. I think I looked at his record on BoxRec a few months ago, and he seemed like he was pretty inactive. So I'm not sure if that's a management thing or what, but I'd like to see that rematch. But Pascal, to me, I think he's earned the role of gatekeeper. I mean, if he's going to keep fighting, he's like a guy who's paid his dues in this sport, and I'm all for him collecting money, before he bows out. He's one of these guys. You look back on his career, and early on, right, he's fighting. You don't hear this fight mentioned all that much, but his fight against Carl Froch was a big fight. It was back and forth. It was close. I thought it was exciting. Froch and Pascal have both been those kind of guys to give us fans some excitement in this sport. So, again, in terms of Pascal, so long as he's going to continue on, I don't mind it so much. But the thing about Browne for me is, he got over the hump in Badou Jack, but I still have my doubts about his doings at the top level just because while I think he's a really talented guy, I mean, he's got quick hands. He can punch a bit. I mean, his body punching seems to be underrated. His combinations are pretty good whenever he decides to let his hands go. But he still has a tendency, whenever he gets clipped cleanly, he still has a tendency to get tentative. And I really want to see how that will play against guys who are good right-hand punchers like Kovalev, Bivol, Gvozdik, guys who have some stiff shots themselves and can put you down. And that's just kind of what I see. But from what I've heard, Marcus Browne will be, I try not to pay attention too much to this alphabet soup nonsense, like this interim crap. It's all a bunch of bullshit. But I think that he will be Gvozdik's mandatory, or maybe I'm mistaken, I can't remember, but he will be in line for a good fight later on this year. So, again, Pascal for the time being, I can deal with it.
Also, other light heavyweight news. Artur Beterbiev was supposed to fight Sullivan Barrera. It looks like the fight negotiations are officially dead. And since Beterbiev, this would have been his first fight with ESPN in Top Rank, do you think there's any chance that we get a unification bout between him and Sergey Kovalev?
That's what I hope for. I mean, Beterbiev. Okay, so Kovalev first went on record of saying, "Hey, I want to fight with the other title holders." Beterbiev is obviously in that. And Beterbiev is the only guy that Kovalev, put his name out there. He said Beterbiev has a title. Let's fight him. So I'm hoping that that's the case. I mean, I know Beterbiev is probably confident of beating Kovalev. They do have a history. Beterbiev beat him twice in the amateur ranks. Of course, we know how that goes. That doesn't necessarily translate into the professional ranks. And, from what I've seen, Kovalev he's the more nuanced guy. He's the more dangerous guy. And I know, maybe Kovalev would like to get some redemption there. I think it would be a damn good fight to make at this point. I mean, I've said on social media that if Kovalev should target anybody who's in the top 5, it's Beterbiev. And I think it's because Beterbiev, unlike Gavanstik, he's not as mobile. Unlike Bivol, he's not as sprightly. He's not as good with his straight punches. So to me, Kovalev, I think, could win the jabbing battle there. Beterbiev relies more on hooks than Bivol or Gavanstik. He's not as good a combination puncher. He seems a bit slower to me. And his chin, while Gavanstik has shown some flaws in that area, I think Beterbiev is probably he's probably the weakest in that department of the top guys. And it's hard to say. I don't know. Browne might be there. Gavanstik might be there. He was dropped by Tommy Karpency. But to me, Beterbiev represents the easiest styles matchup for Kovalev, and I hope it gets done. I think that would be a big fight, and a lot of people would look forward to it.
All right. And, of course, we had Venice Erosion on last night talking about belts and how the WBC kisses Canelo Alvarez's ass. And now we get a story that there has been another belt created for Canelo to win if he beats Daniel Jacobs May the 4th. Are you excited about this new belt that he could win, Jeremiah?
Oh, dude, come on, man. I'm a huge fan of the belt. So, so long as the WBA is turning out interim belts and, regular belts and the WBC's got, silver champions and diamond belts. And I mean, it's obviously, putting the sport on the right track. We're going down the right direction. Kudos to Sulaimon. I understand, right? No, it's Sulaimon is kissing Canelo Alvarez's ass like he has been. Okay, I mean, this is the way it's been for the entirety of their relationship, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said on the Marta Rosian interview, Alvarez's first title fight was against Matthew Hatton, who had no significant wins at 154 pounds and had hardly any fights at all above 147. I mean, this was a guy who was struggling to beat Lovemore Endo, a faded Lovemore Endo beforehand. So he was pretty much handed his first belt on a silver platter. I mean, this is a company in the WBC who's shown a clear Mexican bias over and over again. Look how they maneuvered Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. into a title shot. Look how they showed favorites with Jose Luis Ramirez and Julio Cesar Chavez and Daniel Zaragoza. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and it's going to keep going on. I mean, and this is what the third or fourth fight that Canelo Alvarez will be in that the WBC will have made a special trinket for, right? They made the Cinco de Mayo belt. They made the Honcho belt. I think those were separate things. So he's just trying to kiss Alvarez's ass because he was acting like a jaded girlfriend when Alvarez was like, well, I'm not dealing with your organization. I never want to fight for the WBC title again. And now he's just making sure he's cementing that relationship. And honestly, it reeks of corruption to me. It's how many boxing fans have you seen, Mike, already, on Twitter and Facebook that are already like, well, Daniel Jacobs is already down 2 rounds on the scorecards.
Knockout. Gotta knock him out. You might get a draw because then we could get a rematch off a draw.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, they can create some other stupid belt for, Mexican Independence Day, right? I mean,
the Speedy Gonzalez belt is what I'm waiting on.
Yeah. I mean, dude, it's just continuing on. It's going to continue on. I mean, the WBC, again, they have their Mexican bias. They want to make sure that they solidify their relationship with the biggest Mexican fighter, the biggest star in boxing right now. I mean, they can't get those. They already missed out too much on those sanctioning fees, so they gotta get it in. But it's just another joke. That's all it is. I mean, I'm so tired of this crap. But I will say that I have seen more fans lately. I mean, this does seem to be snowballing into something, and obviously it probably won't be serious enough to where these guys are going to check themselves, but I have seen more people on social media calling it out, telling them that they're a joke, and I just I hope that it turns into something where these guys start to act ethically, but we know how boxing is. It's probably not going to change anything.
Yeah, and the thing that is really funny, especially after talking to Marta Rosian last night, is Sulaimon's quotes from the press conference where he says, "At the WBC, we feel that boxing is the tree that provides the shade for boxers. Our commitment is to continue making boxing safer, take care of the fighters, and on the other hand, look for the biggest fights. Today, we can say boxing is a safer sport than it was in 1963 when the body of work was born, thanks to President Adolfo Lopez Mateos."
Yeah, well, and there was a thing. So there's a boxer, and this has been making the rounds. There's this boxer, and his name's Lee. I can't remember what it is. Lee Noble Jr., I think, and he has cancer, and he's going to die from it. And Sulaimon tweeted at him, and he was like, "Hey, we're going to make you an honorary champion. We're sending you a kit." Okay. And that's all good and well, right? Yeah, he gets to look at some shiny piece of leather and metal before he kicks the bucket. But what are they doing for Adonis Stevenson? We talked about this with Martirosyan last night. He's the one who brought it up, and I thought it was a fair point. What are they doing for Stevenson? Stevenson held their title and was given a pass by the WBC years, not defending against their mandatories and whatnot. So are they going to pay his medical bills? Are they going to take anything out of their coffers and put it, to a good cause, right? It's one thing to build a belt, give it to a guy, but Stevenson's likely going to have long-term damage. This is a guy who's going to rack up big medical fees. Are they giving him back his sanctioning fees? Is that what they're doing? I mean, the WBC has made some inroads with their programs, right? They have done some good things, right? At least they have done some random drug testing. That's better than a lot of places can say, and they also said they were going to implement some weight program, but the sport obviously needs better. And these guys keep playing favorites, right? We saw Canelo Alvarez was enrolled in the VADA program, but not being tested when they initially said that he was, right? I mean, so it's just shady bullshit, right? Sulaimon, he's just, right? He's part of the dark underbelly of the sport, and he needs to be eliminated just like all these other guys. The sport deserves better. These fighters deserve better.
All right. Also, ESPN, one of your favorites, WBC and lineal light heavyweight champion Alexander Gvozdzik will make the first defense of his world title against Dodo Ngumbu on Saturday, March 30th. Why? Let's see. I know he just won the title, but, I mean, this fight is doo-doo, Jeremiah.
It's doo-doo with doo-doo, yeah. Ngumbu or however the hell you say his name. But, yeah, it's the typical, alphabet stuff. Gvozdzik gets he gets to get a soft touch, and then, he has to fight somebody tougher at the end of the year, right? That's apparently the plan.
Unless he doesn't like Adonis Stevenson did.
Yeah, right. Unless they let him opt out for some dumb reason. But I don't know. I mean, I've seen Ngumbu fight before. He's a safe guy, right? He's not a big puncher.
Yeah, he's all right. He's average, and he's not dangerous.
Exactly. They always throw these guys in with non-punchers, and so the verdict is pretty much set in stone. Gvozdzik will score a nice, he'll probably score a nice knockout win here. But Ngumbu is a guy who has given some solid guys some rounds. I think he went. I think he went the distance with Fonfara. Salamov, who's a prospect. So he's a guy who can give you some rounds, but he's not a guy who's going to beat a top-level opposition. And so, again, the verdict is set in stone. Gvozdzik's going to win. And like so many other guys, like Marcus Browne, who we talked about before, we need to see these guys against the best opposition. I mean, we've talked about, on the weekly show about how 175 has some talented guys right there, right? And there's a selling point.
We're not sure how good they are because they don't fight
exactly.
anybody.
Yeah, and this is a constant, right? This is why fans, especially newer fans, need to take a step back and look at this stuff before they start crowning guys great. I mean, that sports in general has become so hyperbolic. There's whenever you're listening to an announcer anymore, it's not the Don Dumfies anymore who don't need to explain everything to you, right? He's just like, hey, we got two classy fellas here, and one's boxing nicely, right? Nowadays, it's, oh my God, what he did was great. It's unbelievable. I have a problem with people who say that's unbelievable.
Look at that
if you've been
check
watching
left
sports. Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, it's like John Responti said, the screamers, right? You got the Mauro Ranallos of the world who've got to yell at you for 45 minutes the entire way through a fight, and I don't need that shit. I don't like it. I don't like it one bit, to be honest with you. And again, it permeates all sports. Okay, so just watching football, I don't know how many times I've heard it's unbelievable. No, it is believable.
Yeah. They're the greatest
if you've been
of
watching
all
sport,
time. I mean, outside of Muhammad Ali, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was almost no debate on who the greatest of all time was. They just called the game. I don't remember when Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were playing where people are talking about who's the greatest of all time. We just watched them play. You can't know who the greatest of all time is until it's over with. Once the career's over, then you can judge them against other people, but then it's just subjective, so it's all basically stupid anyways.
Yeah, no, and that's why I've always appreciated your list, Mike, because you have a tendency more than a lot of other people who make lists to put things into context, right? When you look at football, it's easy to be wooed by the padded stats that a lot of players are putting up nowadays, both in the NBA and the NFL. The sports that have been making all the constant rule changes that have favored the offense, right? But you have a tendency to put things in a context, and you'll see this football player who may have 400 tackles less than a guy like Zach Thomas or Ray Lewis or whatnot, but that doesn't make his impact on the game any less just because statistically he's less significant. Well, I guess he's not less significant there, but you're not putting it into the proper context when guys like ran more, or you know what I mean. It's like these people are constantly getting ahead of themselves with this. It's like wide receivers, for instance. I think that's a good example where you've got guys constantly putting up reception numbers and yardage numbers better than Andre Reed from the Buffalo Bills.
Well, not even that. If you look back, Lynn Swann had like 400 career receptions. I mean, hell, a guy like A.J. Green or Julio Jones does that in 3 or 4 years now. But it's because the game is different. In the 1970s, guys could jam you all the way down the field. The great thing about boxing is everything is still the same. There's no headgear you fight. There's no anything to take away from the game except for when you get the decision or a bad referee. And those are just two constants that you're never going to get rid of anyways because of human error. But it's the one thing I like about boxing. It's still comparable to what we saw when Joe Giannetti was fighting or when Joe Gans was fighting. It's still basically the same sport.
Well, yeah, and I would piggyback off that point and say that boxing is unique in the sense that, a lot of times we talk about evolution of sport and whatnot, and I think that's fair. I mean, I encourage a lot of people to go watch Adam Shapiro's TED Talk where he talks about, whether athletes are actually bigger, stronger, and faster. It's very interesting. And he attributes a lot of it to technology and yada, yada. But boxing, I think, and the reason I love this sport is not only because of the one-on-one competition, and you can't blame other people. This isn't professional football. You can't say, hey, well, the special teams messed up, and that's why we lost the game, or this so-and-so missed a catch. In boxing, if you mess up, that's your ass, okay? And so, you can blame it on, oh, well, I didn't train properly. It still all goes back to you. You can't say, oh, well, my corner man gave me bad advice. It's your decision whether or not you choose to obey it or not. But the thing I like about boxing is, you look at all these sprint times and whatnot of guys like, Usain Bolt, and, these times are constantly improving. And, of course, it's really just the drugs. But boxing is unique in the sense that it's not just running in a straight line. Guys like Marcos Maidana, Ricardo Mayorga, guys who are raw, right? We've seen tons and tons.
There's different ways to attain greatness.
Exactly, right. It's not this, necessarily. How many times have we seen guys who are faster or quicker, right? Have quick twitch muscles or whatnot, and they're great counter punchers. But somebody like Vernon Forrest. Vernon Forrest was a consummate boxer, right? Tight technique, good work rate, wonderful sense of distance and timing. And he's stopped by Ricardo Mayorga and decisioned by Ricardo Mayorga in the rematch. I mean, look at Marcos Maidana. So, Adrian Broner is the twitchier guy. He's the quicker guy. He's the cockier guy. Overall, you would say he's a more talented guy, but Maidana kicked his ass, right? He was raw. I mean, that's what I love about, this sport. I mean, the guys who are raw are always going to, be able to compete on a playing field with the guys who are technical and whatnot, just because, it's so much about timing. And, you talk about football. I hear this often, like, oh, it's a game of inches. Boxing really is a game of inches and centimeters, if you will. I mean, it could just be right. I posted the Thomas Adamek, Jonathan Banks clip today, and Banks threw a wonderful counterpunch and clipped Adamek right on the chin. But because Adamek had the skull of a Neanderthal, he took it and then eventually landed his own less pretty right hand and put Banks away. I mean, that's what I love about the sport, and that's why it's going to continue to be in the spotlight at least somewhat. But yeah, now I'm kind of lost as to where the hell we were going with all this.
Yeah, I don't even know what we were talking about, but that's all right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where we originally started with all this, but I know we were talking about the Gavad stick and Gumbu fight. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about boxing, and that's why people continuously pay attention.
Yeah, and you talk about people continually paying attention. I think we can all agree that something that is huge for boxing, especially to make it more than just a regionalized sport, is to have a global heavyweight champion. When you look at these guys, the Furies, the Joshuas, Anthony Joshua, he's going to fight in the United States against Jarrell Miller. I think that is the best way for him to become a global superstar. Now, when you look at his personality, his ability to fight or box, do you think that Anthony Joshua could ever be that global superstar?
Oh, man, I was thinking this over before we even came on air, and I'm still at odds with myself, to be honest with you, because I think there is a road for him to be big. And, and I think if Tyson Fury wins against Deontay Wilder, I think he could potentially be bigger than Anthony Joshua, just because Fury, to me, has more American appeal than Anthony Joshua does. And the thing about Anthony Joshua for me is whether or not he can win America over. And this is what I was debating. And, that's why I like having you on, so maybe you can help me tease out the details here. But I think Joshua will probably have a hard time winning Americans over, partly because of his personality, which seems manufactured. But to me, there's sort of a cultural disconnect between the way Joshua is and the way Americans like to see somebody like him, right? He just doesn't come across as charismatic. In that way, he reminds me a little bit of Lennox Lewis, where he just doesn't have that personality that really can put him over the hump. I mean, he's got Nigerian roots, right? But what are you gonna go fight in Nigeria and make some money? I mean, that wouldn't be bad. I mean, guys like Ali, fought George Foreman in Zaire. That did good for his brand. But I don't know. To me, it just seems as if Joshua, he's marketed very well, and he's had a lot of casual fans from the United Kingdom latch on to him. But I have noticed whenever I visit the American forums, really a lot of them side with Deontay Wilder. They like the way Deontay Wilder carries himself more than Anthony Joshua. And of course, some of that is a lot of misinformation, that, Wilder offered him $50 million and he didn't accept. But again, I go back to the cultural disconnect. To me, a lot of Americans, a certain segment of Americans like to see brashness. They like to see somebody who's cocky. And if you're not cocky, at least not outspoken, they want to see you demolish guys, sort of like Mike Tyson did. I mean, Tyson was not the most charismatic figure, but the way he was blowing guys away, you latched on to that. And again, that's my thing. Maybe you can help me out here, Mike, but it just doesn't seem like Joshua has that personality which will appeal to Americans. That's why I say Fury is more of a sell here than Joshua is.
All right, we talked about Lennox Lewis. I think we could all agree that he was a global superstar, correct?
Yeah, I could say that.
Okay, not huge. He's not Muhammad Ali, but how many people are? I think the thing that made Lennox Lewis a global superstar, though, was he had Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson in the opposite corner from him. So I think if Fury or Wilder were to get big, then Joshua could become huge. But without that, I don't think he has the personality necessary to become, a guy that is a global superstar on his own. I think he needs help. Lennox Lewis, if you take away Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, would have just been the heavyweight champion of the world. He wasn't an extremely exciting fighter. I mean, you watch him toy with David Tua. He did get the occasional big knockout. I think there's a lot of comparisons with Lennox Lewis here. I don't think Lennox came off as fake, though, which I think Joshua does.
Yeah, right. I think you're right there. Well, and I also think maybe you're wrong. I mean, you're probably more knowledgeable about this than I am. But I don't know if, fighting for Canada in the amateurs and being in the UK, like it just seemed like he bounced around geographically early in his career. So I think to me, it seemed like there was more crossover appeal because of that. But, I don't know.
I don't remember. Lennox Lewis, I mean, when he fought Ray Mercer was the big name there in the United States. And I thought Ray Mercer beat him. I thought it was a bad decision. When you look at Lennox Lewis's career, though, and I know a lot of people that are of British descent will hate this, but he beat old versions of Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. Now, I think Lennox Lewis is a top 10 heavyweight of all time. But there is still that. I still think Lennox Lewis beats Mike Tyson anytime he fights him. I don't know that I think that if a 1999 Lennox Lewis is fighting a 1990 Evander Holyfield. I think that could be a totally different fight.
Well, yeah, and the Lennox Lewis benefits a little bit from it's not revisionism. It's just people recognizing that the '90s was actually a pretty good era. So when you look at guys like an old Tyson, whatever, Holyfield, whatever, Tua, whatever, right? These guys at the top represented something greater than what we have today. And we've talked about this before. I'm not even sure. Deontay Wilder's better than Michael Grant, to be honest. I mean, Grant had more talent.
Well,
he was sharper technically.
He's beaten better. He beat better fighters, too. I mean, the Andrew Golota he beat was extremely good. The Lou Savarese he beat was good. I mean, Deontay Wilder, I just think this, in the end, as a heavyweight, you either got to be a destroyer or you got to have exceptional charisma.
Yeah, right.
The only chance he has there, from what I've seen, is to beat a destroyer.
Yeah, and he's not really. I don't think he's that, right? I mean, he does score knockouts, and you got to give him credit there. I mean, and so long as he keeps scoring knockouts, he'd be pretty good. But of course, there's also some of the things that he said in the past. That he wants to keep his things in the UK, and and I know that appeals to the native population a bit better. But of course, even Eddie Hearn recognizes that the big money is in the United States, and there has to be some appeal there. And I think it's a good thing, right? In terms of marketing, it's a good thing. I mean, if he goes and beats up Jarrell Miller and let's say Deontay Wilder beats Tyson Fury, I mean, then I think because of Fury's story now, Wilder will actually be a pretty good sell for Anthony Joshua. But for me, I think you would have to have a good number, because Joshua is young enough. I think you would have to have a sizable number of guys coming up through the ranks who pose legitimate challenges to Anthony Joshua. And I think Tyson Fury has to beat Deontay Wilder and build his brand up. And I think you could have a really damn good fight there. And again, because of the marketing, I think, I don't know. I still struggle with the American part. It's just personality-wise.
And also on top of that, he needs young Americans coming up. Now, you got guys like Nathan Gorman, Daniel Dubois, Joe Joyce. Not a big fan of Joyce, but the other two I think could be something. But those are fights that are going to happen in England. I mean, he needs an American counterpart.
Yeah, and it seems like the guys who are coming up through the ranks are a lot of Eastern European guys. I mean, so what do you fight them in America? I don't know. That just seems like a tough sell too. But for me, he can maybe he can, if he sticks around long enough, because
he's young enough, he could continue to improve and turn into a hell of a heavyweight.
Yeah, and that's what I think. I mean, I think of all the guys doing it right now, I think he's the best guy out there. And he seems as if he's constantly improving too. I suppose he could have longevity and just keep knocking off challenger after challenger, and you never know, right? You look at the Vladimir Klitschko fight, and if Anthony Joshua can be in a few more fights like that, I do think that will do well for his brand, and I think Americans will overlook some of his blandness in terms of personality and say, hey, man, he's an exciting fighter. Whether or not he says things that appeal to me, he's in fights that I want to see. So I suppose there is some inroads there, but I still just struggle with the personality thing because I'm on Facebook a lot. I'm on a lot of Facebook groups. I mean, I got to be because I got to make up my casual Monday so people can laugh at that stuff.
Yeah.
But when I look at the Americans, there really is not an attachment there. These guys, even hardcore Joshua fans on American side, they're not really riding or dying with him. It's just one of those things like, yeah, I like him. I think he's the best, and he's all right. But I think with you and I, Mike, it's just like Joshua to us is so far he's not really gotten over the hump, right? Nothing he's really done is it's not really told me that there's greatness there, but we'll see if he keeps knocking off guys for years, maybe even the top challengers, maybe he'll get there. But right now, I just struggle to see it just because of the personality.
All right, let's go ahead and go to On This Day. What do you want to talk about that happened on this day, Jeremiah?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the De La Hoya Quartey fight. I mean, because that was a pretty damn that was a barn burner. I mean, shit, that was one of those fights that I was rooting against Oscar De La Hoya. I think De La Hoya was easy to root against during his day, because he seemed like he had it all, right? I mean, when he was an amateur, people were calling him the gold.
I rooted against him because he seemed like a prick. And the thing that really makes me feel better about that is after watching him after, he retired, I was right. So I'm all right that I cheered against him because he is and was prick.
Yeah. I don't know if all that went to his head or whatnot, but I mean, I remember, when he was an amateur, they were writing all sorts of articles about him. He was, handsome and he had some, appeal, and he was light skinned, so there was broader appeal, and this guy just seemed like he had it all from the moment he became a medalist, And that to us, I mean, for a lot of boxing fans, we love rooting for the underdog. So when you see this guy who looks like he's being gifted, right? He's fighting for, some fringe trinket in his 13th, 14th fight, I believe. The WBO.
Jimmy Breedall?
Yeah, the Danish guy. And it just for us, I mean, even back then the WBO title was not significant, but it was still one of those things where he could pad his resume and maybe bolster his checkbook a little bit. But it was one of those things where it was easy to root against De La Hoya, and as a promoter, I think it's been even easier to root against him. But then in retrospect, you look at the guys that he took on it, and he was a guy who was not afraid to fight anybody.
Yeah.
And
Molina, Rafael Ruelas, Gennaro Hernandez, Jesse James Leija, Julio Cesar Chavez, Miguel Angel Gonzalez, Pernell Whitaker, Hector Camacho, Wilfredo Rivera, Chavez again, Ike Quartey, Obacar, Felix Trinidad, Shane Mosley, Arturo Gatti, Fernando Vargas, Yori Boy Campos, Shane Mosley a couple times, Felix Stearns, Bernard. He never ducked anybody. And I think there's still a case to be made. His career was better than Floyd Mayweather's.
Well, yeah, I mean, you most people saw him beating Mosley in the rematch. He got gypped against a decision. He got gypped against Tito Trinidad. That's a win. In my opinion, that's a win. I watched that fight.
He beat Trinidad. I didn't have him losing more than 3 rounds.
No, that's what I had. I watched that fight, I think, 2 years ago, and I had it 9-3 for De La Hoya. And my thing is, even if you want to take the line that Oscar De La Hoya coasted to the end, this is my point. De La Hoya was clearly the superior fighter there. Whenever they were engaging, he was clearly. If you're telling me he only lost because he decided to move around more, it's not because Trinidad was starting to connect that much. It wasn't. Go back and watch the fight. Trinidad barely landed a single hard shot in that entire fight, and De La Hoya had a great chin. This was not a guy who was going to fold. And as hard as Trinidad punched, I really don't see a scenario where Trinidad was going to put him out. So in my opinion, a lot of people like to rate Tito Trinidad high, and whatever, that's all good and well. But you look at contemporaries, right? And De La Hoya was clearly better than Trinidad, who was clearly one of the better welterweights of his era. So in my opinion, you give him the second Mosley fight, even though I do think that was a bit closer than a lot of people do. But you give him the Trinidad fight. He ekes out the Quartey decision.
The Mayweather fight was close.
The Mayweather fight. So he was clearly past his best. So we're talking about an inactive De La Hoya who's a little bit bigger, but again, he's inactive. He's just an on and off again fighter at that point, and he fights Mayweather close. I don't think it's absurd at all to say, hey, De La Hoya might actually win that fight if you're talking about a prime De La Hoya and 147-pound version of even if you're talking about a welterweight Mayweather.
You're talking lightweight,
right? Yeah,
that might be completely different. And we talk about Ike Quartey though in this fight, and this was a great fight. De La Hoya, they both got knocked down, I think, in like the 6th round. Quartey, got in a lot of trouble in the 12th round. Harold Letterman of HBO actually had Quartey winning the fight. The AP had it 116-111 for De La Hoya. It was a split decision with the 3 judges. But the thing that stood out to me was the 12th round, and De La Hoya came out and blitzed Quartey, had him in serious trouble the first minute and a half. Quartey came back, but I think this is one of those great underrated fights, and I think Ike Quartey was a great underrated fighter.
Yep. Because, again, we talk about close decisions. I know we went on about this quite a bit with Rocky Lockridge. Sorry, but, you just talk about decisions that are, just different one way or the other, and he got an entirely different perception of them. Quartey was a handful. He was a real damn handful. He had a fantastic jab, one of the best jabs I've seen from a welterweight. He was tough. His technique was a little off. He kind of set a standard for Ghanaian fighters. And you saw Joshua Clottey, who molded his style very much after Quartey, but that shows you his sort of influence. But yeah, this was a back and forth fight, and I think when you watch this fight, De La Hoya earned a reputation of not closing out his fights. But I think you look at the 12th round, and he gave it his all here, right? He went after Mosley in the 12th round, even though he lost, in the first fight. I think De La Hoya did just fine. He had some, decisions, but like you look at the Whitaker fight, I actually thought De La Hoya did better in the second half of the fight than he did in the first half of the fight. So I think some of that is a bit misleading, when you say, oh, well, he was a front runner, or, he just didn't close the show. To me, he won so many damn rounds in the Tito Trinidad fight. He didn't need to close the show. He had made the statement that he needed to. But yeah, this was a damn good back and forth fight, and it was. I love that even though these guys were tactical fighters in the sense that Quartey loved to lead with his jab, which was powerful. De La Hoya, you look at his style, and it was just built for offense. He was pretty square. His combination punching was fluid. It was fast. It was hard. And there were some nice exchanges here. And, it just, to me, it showed what De La Hoya was capable of in terms of offense. He wasn't moving as much as he did with Tito Trinidad. So it was a damn good fight. And I wish that we saw more contemporary battles like that. You look at Quartey and you look at Mosley, and to be honest with you, there hasn't been much like it since those fights. Can you think of a welterweight fight? Two guys who are physically built for that division, who are damn good fighters, fighting, near their primes or in their primes. There hasn't been much like it since.
Yeah, and the way it's looking, there's not going to be anything near that coming up anytime soon.
Nope.
Because I don't think Terrence Crawford and Amir Khan cut it for that, or Danny Garcia against anybody. Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't get fights like that anymore. The sad thing, the thing I didn't realize about this fight was it had been like a year. Ike Quartey had been out of the ring for like a year and a half before the De La Hoya fight also. And then he came back and he fought Fernando Vargas in a really close fight a year later after the De La Hoya fight.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, Vargas beat him, but Quartey seemed to be one of those guys who wasn't adversely affected by layoffs. So he actually had a long layoff before he fought Vernon Forrest as well. And I thought he got screwed in that fight. I thought he clearly beat Vernon Forrest by decision, but they gave Forrest a close one, and I'm not sure what that was all about. But to me, Quartey clearly won that. But yeah, Quartey was just not a guy to shy away from anybody, and he was tough. And to be honest with you, I kind of wish I would have seen him against more guys. I mean, I would have loved to have seen Quartey versus Trinidad, Quartey versus Mosley. I think those would have been fantastic fights.
Well, and the thing is,
but unfortunately, we didn't
fight. That's 18 years after he turned pro.
Right.
Because he turned pro in 1988.
And to be honest with you,
yeah.
Yeah, and against Forrest, you could see that both men were clearly faded by that point, but they weren't clunking around. It wasn't one of those things where, Ray Leonard, Duran 3. I mean, I think these guys were a bit closer than, Duran was to his prime. But no, it was a damn good fight. And I wish I would have seen some of the other ones. Like, Vernon Forrest was ranked highly at that time. And again, as
Forrest and De La Hoya.
I think that would have been fantastic. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that. And Forrest was ranked really highly. Actually, Vernon Forrest, I think, was the first guy that Al Heyman ever managed. And I know Vernon Forrest was ranked highly for years and just never got that shot until Mosley, credit to him, finally was like, all right, well, the guy deserves his credit. And then he got
Raul Frank, he fought him for the vacant IBF championship. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know, but Frank, right? But yeah, Frank wasn't really
Raul Frank. I just wanted to say it. You know that.
Yeah, that's probably the only time we'll bring Raul Frank up on this program.
That's why I brought it up, because it's the only chance we get.
Yeah, but I mean, it would have been lovely to see Quartey Mosley, Quartey Trinidad Forrest, all these guys. This is the problem with boxing. And again, folks, this is why we need a governing body, so we don't have to wonder, so we don't have to do, wait for EA Sports to put out a fight night so we can pair our fake little AI characters together and be like, oh well, who would have won if these guys would have fought? We need a governing body so they can force these kind of guys to fight, because Mosley Quartey would have been a hell of a fight. Trinidad Quartey, Trinidad Force, all of those guys mix and matching with one another would have been fantastic. But again, we didn't get it.
All right, guys, we are going to go ahead and wrap the show up for tonight. Do you have anything else before we wrap it up, Jeremiah?
No, I don't have much. I mean, I guess I would just mention on this day as well as, James Toney versus Iran Barkley, and that's kind of viewed as a peak performance by James Toney, and that was a great performance by him as well. He was just counterpunching. God, man, my throat. But no, he was counterpunching, superbly. I mean, his timing was great. He's one of the few fighters that you can see who can put his back on the ropes and, counterpunch with laser guided right hands and left hooks. And, his comfortability in the ring was awesome. It's honestly, that is something that you will rarely see, especially nowadays. I mean, I can't remember who even does that anymore? Like what guys, Mayweather would do it, but there are very, very few fighters in the modern era who would just sit back on the ropes, let you punch, and then they counterpunch you and make you look stupid. And Toney did that to the max in that fight. And again, it was a peak performance by him. And yeah.
Yeah. And if you want, you can hear the interview. I don't know. Did you do the interview with me and him, or were you just on the other one?
No, that was you and the 11-time world champion.
No, 14-time, he said.
Oh, 14,
I said
sorry.
3. We argued about it, and I think we settled that I was right. So you can go to the Grueling Truth, type in James Toney in the little search box on thegruelingtruth.net, and hear the interview that was done with James Toney. Also, check out the interview I did Monday night with Marvin Camel, which is one of the underrated fighters in boxing history. Jeremiah, you want to tell everybody where they can hear us?
Yeah, and real quickly, I would say check out the Vanis Martirosyan interview we did last night as well. A lot of interesting stories there, more about the dark side of the sport. And again, there's a lot of interesting stuff to tease out there and get from it. But you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. I mean, Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, we're everywhere, so comment, rate, subscribe, like, all that stuff. YouTube, we're here, and we'd appreciate some of the feedback as well. Anything we can do to improve the listener experience, again, get with us. Send me a personal message on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever, and we'll look into it.
All right, guys, and tomorrow, let me remind you, at noon, you can listen to Survive and Advance with me and Steve Risley. We will have Max Lipister, who's an NFL agent, on at the top of that hour at noon Eastern Time. At 12:30, NBA beat writer Cole Hanna and Bobby Sheridan will be on to talk a little NBA. And then Friday, Brian Ralph will be in to talk college basketball. Plus, we are in talks. I think we may have an interview with the owner of the New Orlando team in the AAF. So make sure you keep an eye out there. Tomorrow night, Inside Boxing Weekly, that's me, John, Jeremiah, will be here at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Correct, John? Or Jeremiah?
Yep, that's correct.
So you can check us tomorrow night, live at 9 o'clock on thegriddlingtruth.net. Friday night, me and Jeremiah will be back at 11 o'clock Eastern with Inside Boxing Daily to keep you up to date every day on all your boxing news. Make sure you comment us if you like the fact that there's a boxing podcast every day, which I don't think there is a daily one outside of us right now. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we need all the help we can to keep bringing you guys like Baines, Smart Erosion, to bring you the legend shows with the Marvin Camels, George Foremans, James Toney. So go comment, give us all the support. We appreciate everybody that listens every night. So far, through a week and a half, the show has done great. We've had a ton of listens. Make sure you tell your friends about it if they're boxing fans, and just share it as much as you can for us. We appreciate everybody that does that. So we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up. Remember, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, wherever you hear sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.